So failure-wise, you got two options.
Yep.
Okay, one, you're overseas in a foreign country.
Yep.
No one around you speaks English.
Yep.
Okay, and you're lost. Like, you have no clue where you are. There's not a sign in English. You're not pulling out the phone, audience, and using Google Translate. You're just, it's done. You're toast. Okay, so that's option one. And this is with your girlfriend, like, or fiance. You're trying to show off. You're trying to look, manly, and you're like, oh crap.
Yep.
Option two, you're driving down the road, middle of nowhere in the U.S. Car, vehicle, truck, buggy, whatever it is, breaks down. No cell phone service, no traffic's coming by anytime soon. Which option do you want to be stuck in?
Oh, I see. Probably the latter. Yeah. Disabled car somewhere.
Okay.
Yeah.
Why is that?
Well, it's a good question. So, I'm an Eagle Scout. I should say that. So, I'm well trained when it comes to taking care of myself in outland areas. And then my dad, growing up, he was he was an accountant by training, but kind of an amateur mechanic. And so he had me like helping him fix cars and stuff growing up. And so I've got a rough, idea of how to fix at least some stuff on cars. And so I think I could, I'd be pretty well equipped to like figure out what's going on. If I'd have to evaluate at the time, what I could do in the situation. But like, I think I'd be, pretty well equipped in that scenario. Overseas, it's harder. Yeah. Outside of the U.S., it's more complex. But middle of nowhere, I could handle myself a little bit.
So I didn't know you're an Eagle Scout. I'm glad I didn't pick the other one. So that we were originally going to say you're hiking and lost, but I'm an Eagle Scout, so I was like, that's just super easy. Like, I'll just pick that one.
Yeah,
like,
right. Yes, totally.
I think I would do the foreign country though, because I'm the type of guy when a vehicle breaks down, I open the hood and I go, the engine's in there still, so that's good.
Yeah, you're right. Yeah,
don't know where to go from here.
Yes, right.
Versus, I think I'm social enough. I just find my way through it.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah. No, it's it's a good call. Yeah. In cars. Yeah. I mean, I don't want to claim to be some like super capable, but like I can do the fundamentals and cars are harder now than they ever have been too. That's the other dynamic, like all the electrical stuff and all that. But I think I could figure that out. But yeah. So,
awesome.
Yeah.
Well, if y'all haven't caught on, you're on the Do You Even Fail podcast. We're here to talk about just the mess ups of life. So super excited. We have Jim on today. If you want to dive into, give him the flyover of who you are and what makes you you before we get into your mess ups.
Yeah. My name is Jim Schultz. I grew up in a small town called South Haven, Minnesota, a town of 186 people. Went to college in the Twin Cities and then out east and met my beautiful wife Molly out there. And we now live in a small town in the Southwest Metro called Minnetonka. We've got 3 little daughters that are 8, 5, and almost 3 that keep us really busy. And my family's most important part of my life. Professionally, I'm an attorney by training, and now I run an organization called the Minnesota Private Business Council that advocates for things that we think that help businesses to grow in Minnesota and more broadly, and for policies that can support that. And other than that, just keep at it with the family. So
I like it. So before we get into your journey and mess ups along the way, do you think you should seek out failure?
That's a good question. It's kind of I'd say kind of complex question. Like, I think you should seek out things that can lead to failure. Like there's kind of a ways of approaching life where it's, you don't do anything where you might fail. Right. And that's one way to do life. Like, and you can, and there's nothing, I guess, intrinsically wrong with that, but doing things that have the risk of failure, I think is really valuable, because you can, on the one hand, you can, achieve things that you wouldn't have otherwise achieved. And then on the other hand, you learn a lot through failure. And that's like kind of like a cliche, I think. But I think you can learn a lot through failure. I certainly have in my life. I've had the good fortune of being, successful in a lot of different things, but I have had some meaningful failures in my life. And through that, you get tougher, you learn about yourself, you learn about how to do things, how not to do things along those lines. And so I think, seeking out failure, I would say, in itself, probably not intrinsically something to pursue, but you certainly do learn a lot through it. And there's kind of like this like a way of approaching life that I think like some, young people, I'm fairly young still, 38, I'm a millennial, but my generation and younger, just kind of like I think there is a contingent of people who kind of go about life like kind of like in bubble wrap, where they like try to avoid, the things that where they might, be damaged or fail or things like that. And I think, I think that's a mistake, and I think, the way to like just broadly, one of my this is a long answer to your question, but I think there's a way of going about life where you kind of seek comfort, all the time, where you don't take risk, where you just, it's all about, having a very comfortable job, comfortable life, you avoid deep entanglements with friends or family or things like that, because that can cause pain and things like that. And I think the way to go about life is not to seek comfort, but to seek a life of sacrifice and risk, and that's kind of how I think about things. But with that comes failure and pain and all that. But I think that's where more meaning lies in life.
So for people listening, I love your answer, but I feel like a lot of people miss the part of, hey, you should seek out challenges or things that could result in failure. How does someone even go about analyzing their own life and seeing where to start in that? Because I think we all look at levels of failure and have different tolerance inside of it. But I also think that results in us thinking these tiny steps are risks, even though they're nothing. So if someone's at home, how do they process that or think about that in your opinion? Or how do you?
Yeah. Yeah, I would say, so, I'm an attorney by training, and, attorneys are, quintessential people who are risk averse, right? Because you, as an attorney, you like see all sorts of situations where things have gone sideways, where people are suing each other because of a business transaction that went bad. People are suing each other because of a marriage that failed. People are, signing up contracts where they're trying to avoid every possible, bad outcome in connection with a business transaction or whatever. And so attorneys tend to be extraordinarily risk averse. And, I kind of, I would say like through the course of my practice, I kind of became more risk averse as time went on. And, I ran for Minnesota Attorney General in 2022, and that was like a extraordinarily risky thing. And that kind of reset my kind of risk, tolerance, in a lot of different ways. But, to answer your question, I think people should think hard about, fundamentally, it's not, you kind of just, you don't do things for the sake of, taking risks or things like that. But you do want to look at things. What do I really want in, deeply in life? And then you want to take risks to pursue that, and that whether that's, I want to, I want to be married and have kids. And so I'm going to take the risks of, going out there and dating, and with the possibility of being rejected and all that and so forth. Or it's, I want to build my own business and so forth. And with that, comes risk. And so it's about, finding the things, what it really is that I want, that I think is right for my life, that I, given my values, given the things I hold dear, what do I want? And from there, it's, it's thinking through the risks, and analyzing them and trying to find ways to mitigate them. If you're doing if you want to start a business, it's doing things that are prudent to, to mitigate risk and things like that, or whatever. But and then being willing to step out and do it. And that can be really hard when you're taking big risks. Like, in my life, when I quit my job, I, stepped away from a very comfortable professional life to run a race for Attorney General. And, that was extraordinarily risky. And a lot of people asked me, like, what the heck are you doing? But, my wife and I talked about it, and we felt like this is what we're supposed to be doing with our life at this time in our life. And through a lot, through a fair amount of discussion, and in our case, we're people of faith, a fair amount of prayer, we decided to move forward with it. But to answer your question, I think it's a matter of, of being clear with yourself, like what do I really want to achieve in life at this point in my life and otherwise, and then being willing to step out there and take the risks to do that.
So where do we want to start in Jim's story of, hey, I saw something I wanted, I stepped out and, risk and faith and belief to go get it, and it didn't turn out?
So I've had a few different spots in my life where I've taken kind of meaningful risks, and sometimes they've I've succeeded and had a good outcome, and sometimes I've failed. And on this one I referenced, to kind of zoom out, basically, or step back a little bit in time. In kind of calendar year 2020 in Minnesota, many people know we had of course the George Floyd murder, we had the rioting and so forth that came after that. And when from my perspective, I felt like we had state leadership that responded to it extraordinarily badly. My view was that we had leadership that excused rioting, that excused a lot of the really bad things that happened. People obviously can be angry and mad about what happened to George Floyd without burning down people's houses and businesses and so forth. But we had state leadership that defended it, that got behind crazy things like defunding the police and otherwise. And I was really disturbed by that. And at that point, I kind of thought, like, boy, maybe I should step forward and run for public office, because in my view, we just needed, sane, sober-minded people to do that. And I started, like, looking around and kind of just like thinking about it, but I didn't really step forward in a meaningful way, or kind of think about it in a meaningful way, until some people approached me, and I kind of got in dialogue with some people about running for attorney general. And my view was the occupant of the office at the time, who I ultimately lost to, Keith Ellison, was one of those leaders who had really failed in his duties to prosecute crime, to deal with crime seriously, to back policies that resulted in people being protected from crime. And I decided to get into the race. And this was December of 2021. But through that period, it was a very long period where my wife and I were kind of deliberating on this. And we were thinking about things like having young daughters, things like their safety, things like, me running a race while I'm, awake at 2 a.m. to change a diaper. And when I have to go out the next day to drive up to Roseau, Minnesota, 5 hours away, and, the next night be down in Albert Lea, 3 hours away, whatever. And then just, of course, having a period of time where we didn't have any income, and tons of different things. But ultimately, we did that analysis, and we just felt called to it. And it was immensely risky. It was there's a high chance of failure even to become the candidate for my party, and then ultimately to get to the general election. And a lot of people said, like, don't do it. You're certainly going to lose. You won't win the Republican primary. And then if you get past that, you're going to get crushed in the general election, because Minnesota's a light blue state. Blah blah blah. And but ultimately, we just felt like, even despite all these risks, even despite all these ways in which this could go sideways for us, like, this is actually just what we feel like we're supposed to be doing with our life right now. So we got into the race. We ultimately won the Republican primary. It wasn't close, even though people said we were going to get crushed. We won 86 of 87 counties. We won by like 20 points. It wasn't close at all. We had immense success through a lot of hard work. It was a lot of, like, some pretty dark periods in there, some pretty really tough periods in there, but we got it done over a course of about 8 months to win that, and then went to the general election and ran what I think was a really good general election race. We got more votes than any Republican state candidate in Minnesota history. We got the higher percentage of the vote than any Republican in Minnesota statewide in 30 years or so, but we narrowly came up short. We got 49.6% of the race. It was the closest attorney general's race in Minnesota history, and all the polling going into election night had us winning by 6 or 8 points, but we lost. And that was, in all candor, extraordinarily painful. It was, probably the most, like, significant, just failure in my life, like, in terms of the what I was endeavoring to do and so forth. But that was the ultimate outcome. And zooming back from it, like, we certainly have no regrets. Like, we knew we were called to run in this race, but we didn't know whether or not we were called to win, to be successful ultimately. And we left it all in the field ultimately. And we, I think, got an important message out there. I think we affected the conduct of the current attorney general who beat me in office now. I think he's a different public official than he was by virtue of us kind of scaring him to death and getting as close as we did. And of course, there's a lot of personal growth through failure. One thing is, when things are going well, everybody is your friend, right? Like everybody is, saying like you're awesome, in the lead up to the election. There's so many people who, said, "Oh, you got this." Like, I'm so proud to have been part of it. And everybody's singing your praises, and then you fail. And all these same people are, many of those same people, a lot of people stuck with us and stuff, but many of those people, or, you hear criticizing, well, they should have done this differently. They should have done that, or suddenly aren't calling you nearly as much and things like that. And it's like a reminder, like there's some people in your life that will be constant no matter what. There are some things in life that will be constant no matter what. And then there's other things and other people that, that depend on, whether or not you're successful at the time and stuff. And so for me, losing was a very kind of just maturing experience in that, you come to recognize like, oh yeah, I'm going to focus on the things in life that are constant. In my case, my faith, the fact that I believe that fundamentally the most important thing the most important reality in my life is that I'm a son of God who will ultimately answer before God for what I do with my life. And then two, of course, a very close second to that is my family, and my duties to my family, the family that ultimately I've, will always, be there for me, and that ultimately is my fundamental obligations in life. So that's a very long, kind of summary of everything. But that's one thing I took away from, the significant failure of losing that race.
I think one thing that's interesting we haven't had a guest on here with is you were not chasing, because that sounds bad, but you had an end goal, right? And the reality that you would probably fail at that end goal is statistically high, right?
Yeah.
But I think also what I find more fascinating is you had multiple barriers along the way that you statistically shouldn't win.
Yep.
But what you hit on is when you first won your primary, you talked about there's still a lot of dark valleys in that as you were going there.
Yeah.
So in my head, I'm going, how did Jim, in the middle of a dark valley here, that knew this was coming, had to beat that, and then had to do it all over again for round 2, how did you get through those valleys? How did you stay motivated to keep grinding?
Yeah, good. That's a good question. I think one element was like I had burned my bridges. I'd burned my boats, at the shore, sort of thing. Like it wasn't like I left my job. It wasn't like I could just like go back to the same job, sort of thing. It was like, well, this is what I'm doing now, and if I don't do this, like I've got to figure out something else. It wasn't like I was going back to my previous job or something. So like I had burned my boats at the shore, sort of thing. And so that was kind of a motivating thing. Like it's either this or bust, basically. I also, going back to the kind of fundamental fact that we felt called to it, that was just something that just kept me at it. It was like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing with my life. I have to, I've got to do what it takes to plow through, even in dark valleys. And it is really hard, running for public office. And I think there's a lot of things that are like this, running a business or whatever. Like there's lots of people on any given day when you're running for public office that are, whether it be a donor who you're asking to give money, or an average person who you're asking for their vote, or a somebody in the media who's doing an interview with you, who say things to you that are just negative and that are just like stink. Those negative instances probably are 5 to 1 more than the positive. So you just have to have a lot of resilience and take it and develop a thick skin and all that. And I would say it got easier as time went on, to go through the valleys, you kind of get tougher, you go through the valleys and it's like, a deeper, you can handle them more as time goes on. But I would say the things that kept me going were, on the one hand, having this kind of fundamental inner sense where it's like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. 2, my family and support from my wife, Molly, who just, was kind of a constant rock that I could rely upon. And then 3, I had a really good team around me too. Like I was really fortunate, and I'm very proud of the fact that we built a team that was just, I think probably one of the best kind of just like most capable and most dedicated political teams that have been developed in Minnesota in a very long time. And that was really motivating, like just really good people that I trusted and so forth, and just a lot of positive energy there. And like people I could, very candidly lean on when I was in a tough spot. And so I would say those are probably the 3 most significant things, with a huge emphasis just on like believing in what we were doing. Like, having that kind of inner sense that like, this is what I'm supposed to be doing, helped me kind of fight through the tough spots. And there certainly were tough spots. It's like, you're driving up to to Bemidji, which is a wonderful town and so forth, but the 3.5 hour drive up there is a grind, and you're making phone calls on the way to people to ask, to support you in one way or another, and some of them tell you you stink and whatever, and and some of and then you're dealing with the fact that you can't, you're trying to make payroll, you're dealing with the fact that you've got a media inquiry that you don't want to deal with. It's a really running a race is a really hard thing, and so, but I would say those were probably the three things that really kind of kept me going through the dark moments. But
yeah, it's interesting. Man, it's almost like running for a political office. I'm going to argue it'd be harder than starting a business, because the minute you hit go, it's like, well, all the ships are burned. And your conviction needs to be like full bore. You're not going to make it. Just honestly, 'cause we've all seen it. It's ugly out there. It gets ugly. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
But what I'm curious is, before the stage got too big, did you want to quit? You're like, hey, people don't know who Jim is yet. I could probably kind of just shirk back. No one really know about me, and I can move on.
Yeah. Actually, I mean, there's probably, I announced in December of 21, probably like January of 22. I probably kind of like felt that way, a fair amount, where it was just like, I didn't have any like real positive affirmation yet, like where like it's not like I had landed any big endorsements or I had like tons of like huge support out there. So I was just kind of like building, and I probably could have like stepped away at that point. And in all candor, there's in lower moments I probably did have those thoughts. And I think it was just like I had the benefit in life of being like I think I've always been in sports. I was a runner, and like I was a distance runner, and so like
Gross.
I would that's right, exactly. I don't know why one of these weird people who enjoys running long distances, and but like and I did run some marathons and stuff, and it's like it's kind of with those, it's like there's points where it's just like you feel like you want to stop and all that, and it's kind of similar. It's just like I did learn, that was like people learn ways to build in perseverance and all that in so many different ways. But for me, like one thing was like athletics and just like plowing through just the toughest parts, and that was probably in some ways that first month where like those thoughts of just like, boy, maybe this was a bad idea, and you're right, like it wouldn't be as embarrassing, as dropping out if I just pieced out now, but it was just like, no, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I've got the inner resources. I've got the external support to keep fighting, and I just got to plow through. But I'd be lying to you if I said there wasn't moments where I just wanted to call it quits.
Yeah. So when you run for office and you don't make it, it is by far probably one of the most public failure paths you can take. Let's just be honest, right? Like everybody knows, right?
Yeah.
So inside of that, when you didn't make it, especially polls are saying you're leading, it was definitely the race of a lifetime up to this point, right?
Yep.
What does that do to you as a man, emotionally, drive, thought process on life? Like what do you go through? It can't be just like, all right, on to the next thing. Like there had to be some real deep conversations with yourself inside of that.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was really, really tough. Just really, really tough. Like because it wasn't like we were kind of hoping for a miracle on election night. It was like, look, we just basically need the polls to be roughly, close to right. And we're good, and I think like the best poll, kind of the historically most reliable poll going into election night had us up by 6 points, and well outside the margin of error and all that jazz. And then on election night, as things were coming in, it kind of became clear it was unlikely to happen. There's still kind of some outside chance, but it became clear it was unlikely to happen. And it took a little while to sink in, and it was probably very early the following morning, at 5 a.m. or so, where became evident. And I think I drafted a concession statement, and got that. I think ultimately got it out, later that morning, and put a call into Keith Ellison, the Attorney General, and had a fine conversation there. But it took a little while to kind of set in. It wasn't like kind of immediate. But in the probably 2-3 weeks after that, it was really hard. Like, because when you run a race and it's investing in, anything in life really significantly that just, breaks, doesn't happen, is you pour your heart into it. Like you're working 16 hours a day. You're thinking about it the rest of your time. You're dreaming about it. Like, and like in my case, like I wanted to do it because I really wanted to help people, and I thought I could help people. And you feel like you let people down. You feel like all these people had invested in you. You didn't. You didn't deliver for, and so it was really, really painful. And there's, I had the good fortune of, I think people viewed me as having run a really, really good race. And I got that message from a lot of people. It's got one thing if you run a really terrible race and people are telling you like, yeah, you kind of messed that one up, sort of thing. But I had the good fortune of a lot of people saying that, the people viewing my race as being run really effectively and all that, and having just kind of conducted myself in a way that was noble and so forth. But you still, you still feel like, you start thinking about things you could have done differently and things along those lines. But to answer your question, it was hard, it'd take a while just to, process it and things like that and get back on the horse, and get back to working towards some, goals in life and things like that. But it was really like formative for me in my life to go through that. Cause as I said, it was the most significant failure that in my life that I had to date. And it was really just formative for me to experience that. And to, as I said earlier, to be reminded about what is constant in life, what is most important and things like that. And to remind myself too, that this race wasn't something I ran for myself. It wasn't about my ego. It wasn't about just like, getting those accolades and things like that. It was about, something that I felt called to. And ultimately, if the one who I thought was calling me to do this, said like, no, this isn't what I have in store. This isn't what part of my plan. Then I've got to accept that and come to terms with it, and get back to those things like raising my family and those things that I do have to focus on. And so it took a while. To answer your question, it took a while to process and stuff. But it was it was a very as I said, a very formative experience for me in my life.
What was the hardest lesson to swallow?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, like, I had never, like, assumed that, we were going to win. Like, we were, the people, there was, in the lead up to it because of the polling and stuff, a lot of people kind of come up to you saying, like, you're going to win, blah, blah, blah. And I never had let my head, go to that spot. But it's impossible not to, part of your plan, you're telling people this is what I will do if I'm elected and stuff. And so you get in that headspace, like, okay, this is what I'm going to do. And so it was really hard just to swallow, like, okay, I'm not going to be able to do all these things that I think could really help people. And that was just really, disappointing, and like I said earlier, you feel like you let people down and you wish you could do those things. And then, it is also just hard to see your opponent who, whatever respect you may have for them, continuing to do those things that you think are wrong, and stuff like that, and are, mistaken and all that stuff. And so that's hard too, but it's just like, the things that you wanted to accomplish, not being able to do.
Yeah. It's interesting hearing your story, because I think one thing I can just tell is, well, let's backtrack quick. You went through, I would say, a significant failure at what I would call a younger age, right? In my opinion, anyone under 45, you're young, right? It's just that simple, right?
Yeah.
So like you chose at a younger age to take this huge risk.
Mm-hmm.
You had, in my opinion, what I would classify as a huge success in it, right? You did. I mean, ran a great campaign, but the true success I see from it is the maturity you have right now. I don't think you'd be there without running in it, right? The maturity of your faith, understanding your wife, the lessons of, I've experienced on many levels of people who are there and then not there, but not to your level, right? You had people come out of woodwork to support you that I'm sure at some point you're like, oh, we're like linked in arms. And also one day you look around, you're like, oh, my linkage of 100 people is 2.
That's right. Yeah. That's right.
It's God and my wife. Here we go, right?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So inside of all of that, though, how does that change Jim's mindset moving forward when it comes to risk? Like, do you think you're like super high tolerant now and you'll just do some crazy things, or do you think it's all maybe more mellowed you out and you're like, it's really got to be worth it, otherwise I'm not going to do it?
I would say the former there. Like I'm much more risk tolerant than I was, like because this was like such kind of a significant risk, and because I'd frankly become more risk averse as I had practiced as an attorney for years, as I was saying earlier, and so like I definitely kind of coming out of it, like I was looking for the kind of the right, the right job where I felt like this was the right position where I was like, okay, well, this is, this is what I'm supposed to be doing right now. Whereas maybe in previous day of my life, it was like, well, this is a good paycheck, provide some good professional opportunities and so forth. But I kind of took my time and wanted to wait for the right thing. And broadly, like I'm just much more risk tolerant by virtue of having taken this one big risk. And even though it didn't come out the way I had hoped, there was, really I didn't do it for me personally, but there was positive things that came about from it for me personally. And so it was like, even though there was ultimate failure, there was, positive things other than my personal growth or otherwise that came out of it. But so I would say, yeah, I'm definitely more just risk tolerant than I was previously, willing to just kind of step out and do big things and things like that. Because not only because it's like, well, I took a big risk and it turned out fine, even if I didn't win, but it's just like, oh, look at the impact I can have, and I did have an impact, even though I lost, by taking a big risk and everything, and so yeah, I would say definitely more willing to step out there and so forth. But
Yeah, it's interesting where you talk about how like the fruits that still came from it afterwards. So I was talking to my brother-in-law a few weeks ago. We rented an Airbnb with the whole family, and him and I were talking about, it's like it is impossible to progress in anything significantly without loss. Like you just can't. I'm not, let's keep in reason, right? I'm not saying like, you should lose your whole family and everything to go chase something, but if you're not willing to lose things, whether it's lose a race or lose some money or lose some friends that don't belong in your circle or, have negative impact in your life occur to you, you're never going to get these huge gains in growth and experiences. And that's exactly what you're experiencing, right? Like if I didn't take this leap, sure, I slid back, but I also ended up in a spot where I can still drive forward what my vision was because I'm humble enough. It didn't have to be with this title.
Yeah.
I just needed a platform to be able to do it.
Yeah. 100%. Like, and I mean, it's, it sounds cliche and stuff like that. And in sports, it's no pain, no gain, and like, but it's really true. Like, and there's there really is like just something, stuff so much in life, in a extraordinarily wealthy country that we are in in a world where like you can very easily live that bubble wrapped life. Like it's very easy to get drawn into that, and that's like, I mean, there's nothing intrinsically wrong with it. I don't think, but it's like, I don't think that's the path in life that requires that it has the most meaning or things like that. And that doesn't mean like, oh yeah, you have to go start a business or you have to run a political race or anything. But I do think it does mean like, you should think hard about getting married, young, having kids, do it, like doing these things that I think provide the most meaning in life. And because that's anything that is worthwhile doing has pain associated with it. C.S. Lewis has a line, and I'll butcher this, but it's like, love anything in your life and your heart will certainly be broken, and that is emphatically true, right? And but that's what we're made for, is to love and to love others and so forth, but your heart will be broken through that, and stuff. And so 100%, I totally agree with what you're saying there.
Wouldn't you say, I'm going to push back a little bit, I don't think there's anything intrinsically wrong with living a comfortable life.
Mm-hmm.
And I would argue there is, both from my own biblical standpoint, as well as, even if you're not biblical, a lot of people like to say they're here to serve others, right?
Yeah.
And so I would argue from that standpoint is intrinsically wrong. I'm curious on your feedback on that.
I would say like you're probably right on the living a comfortable life, just broadly. Like you can't, we are made for sacrifice. We are human beings made, I believe, we are, created in God's image, and, God, expressed, the fullness of love by virtue of dying on a cross for us. And, we're called to imitate that love. And so I do think like that's what we're all fundamentally called to. Now, I think, I think, what that looks like is different. You know, people can live a very, very quiet, humble life of, doing very, not starting a business, not running not running for public office, and so forth. Just living a quiet life, raising their family raising their family, focusing on just the fundamental things of being human without kind of doing like those massive risk taking things, other than getting married and having a family, that are risk taking things and are in some ways the most risky things out there, but without doing kind of the other things that we've been talking about. And I think that's a very noble in some way. That's the way most people will live their life. And I think as long as they're thinking about their life and in terms of sacrifice and in terms of serving others and so forth, I think that's noble. And I think we're probably in agreement on that. But you're right. Like, I do think there is something wrong of just like fundamentally seeking a life of comfort. Working a few hours a day and then hanging out on the beach. Like, I do think that is not a life conducive to happiness or to meaning or to what we're fundamentally called to. But
so with 100% would agree, and that's kind of what I'm poking at. Is I think there's I don't know if I'm not even going to tag a generation to it, but I think there is a belief around, hey, let's serve myself first and everyone else is second. And that could still be, I'm going to serve myself first and start a business, but that's still my opinion. You're doing what's comfortable because you're taking care of you first versus going, no, I should take care of those around me. Obviously, again, put context around the audience. But yeah, it's about it, and that's how I look at that whole comfort thing. It's easier to take care of just me. Like, it's easy. But to go, hey, I'm not going to do A through Z because of my wife, and then not going to get this done tonight because my buddy really needs me because he's going through stuff. Like, that's the heart I think we should 100%. Lead with.
Yeah, 100%. Totally agree.
But with society today, that I think that's a great example of a fallacy. A lot of people say we should, put self first, right? So any specific fallacy you're really seeing that's popping up a lot now or in the last, just say, handful of years that you just don't agree with?
Yeah, I mean, I would say, my view is that this thing where people wait forever to, or not forever, but wait a long time to get married and have kids, I think is a mistake. And people can have different views and things like that. And there are individual circumstances, that can make sense. But like, I think a lot of people, they think like, okay, I've got to have everything buttoned up fully in my life. I've got to be fully done with all school. I've got to be well established in a business, well established in my profession, whatever, before I get married. And then from there, some period of time before I have kids. And, my view is like, if you're basically able to pay the bills, plus you're mentally, emotionally mature enough, to get married and have kids, like, go for it. Like, my wife and I knew about a month, dating her, I wanted to marry her. We got engaged, ultimately 9 months after we got married. After we met. And then, after that, I was like, well, I know I'm engaged. I want to marry her. Like, I remember talking to my wife, like, let's just get married over spring break. It was like a month away, and get the families there, and everything. And she's like, no, we'll give it a couple more months. But it was 5 months later after we got engaged. So like, basically 14 months from meeting to getting married. And by today's standards, that's super quick, but maybe by historical standards, not so quick. But I was like, at that point, like we were, I think my wife Molly at the time was, when we got married, 24, I was 25, young by today's standards, but it was like we both knew we wanted to get married. We were, mature enough to do so. I was like, of course, well, let's go for it. And I've done a lot of things, wrong in life. I, probably think about a number of things wrong, but I think we got that kind of right. Like, we were ready in life. We knew we loved each other. We knew we wanted to spend the rest of our lives together. Like, let's go for it. And then, we wanted to have kids, as quickly as we could. And it ended up taking us a while and stuff. But like I just think it's a mistake when people think about family life where it's like, oh, I've got to have everything buttoned up fully until I get going on that. And my view is like, you're never going to have everything buttoned up fully. And even if you don't have everything buttoned up fully, like, things work out, like, as long as you work at it, as long as you're selfless, as long as you, do what the kind of fundamental things to be successful, like, it'll be fine, and it won't be, and having things kind of fully in line, won't necessarily result in, in the best thing too. So anyway, my view is just like if I could give advice to young people or just people generally, it's just like, take some risk and go for, go for raising kids, getting married, having kids early. I think.
Why do you think the mind shift has occurred?
I mean, that's a good question. I mean, there's just, I think, that's a good question. I mean, part of it is just like societal shifts where people can like live together now without getting married. You know, like there's just like people, that's like a fine thing to do. And in the past, like people had to, had to get married in order to live together, at least in, in terms of like societal expectations and so forth. Maybe that's part of it. Maybe it's just like looking out, like, and seeing that there's a lot of failure of marriages in our country, and people being more cautious as a result. Either coming from broken marriages, from parents of broken marriages, or just seeing that with friends or otherwise. Maybe there's just probably more caution, and I certainly understand that. And then people's I think there's a lot of focus on wealth and so forth, and some people just it's having kids a little bit later does allow you to accumulate more wealth ultimately and stuff. And so I don't know, I'm kind of just spitballing there, but those would be a few things that come to mind, maybe with the emphasis just on the fact that there's a lot of broken families out there, and people don't want that, and it's a risky thing to get married and have kids and stuff, and so I understand that that mentality and stuff. And my counter would be like, I don't think it happened because people got married young. I think a lot of other factors, a lot of societal factors, a lot of other stuff. And again, it's like ultimately all of this is qualified by people got to be in the right headspace, they got to be mature enough and all that. But I just think like just the mentality of getting married late is or just like delaying. I think is like my encouragement to people would just be like, go for it, that sort of thing. But
it's interesting. What is it? One of Jordan Peterson's famous quotes is one of the best things a man can do to simplify his life. Is to find a woman when he's young and marry her.
Yeah, right? Is that right? Yeah.
Which I would agree with. Man, I watch all my buddies right now run around on the social apps, but it's interesting though. I would say, so for me, I got married at 22. So, right, like
awesome.
the whole world burned down and everyone was panicking, and that was the dumbest thing I could have ever done. Which, when you look at it from a research perspective, what they found out is by getting married young, we actually have a higher odds of not getting divorced because we haven't formed habits yet fully. So versus when you're in your 30s, well, think about it. If you've been alone or dating, but been your own person for till you're 35. And I've talked to people faith-wise, it's just easier to have this conversation, that are that old. They're like, it is brutal. Like when you get married at that age, just like, battle the titans trying to change the mindset.
I get that.
And I equate kind of everything you're talking about. It's whatever is culturally popular is what's easy. And so that's the path people choose. It's kind of like one of our first episodes where I said, I can show up with a salad 10 days in a row, and it's the weirdest thing ever. If I show up with McDonald's 10 days in a row, nobody cares. Right? Because it's societal norms. But it's funny because I'm on the flip side on the kid perspective. So my wife and I don't want kids. And some people poke to me. It's definitely part of it. If you look at my childhood resultant, like, hey, I don't want kids. The way I was, brought up, and same partially with her. And but the interesting part, it took us forever to decide that, because our thing was still, well, we don't want it to be a selfish reason. So what's the real reason? And then what are we going to do with that time instead, right? Because in our opinion, it was like, hey, we're not going to do that. We're going to clearly be in a spot that a lot of people wouldn't be. So then how do we take care of our nieces and nephews? And how do we take care of other people's kids around us, right? But I agree. You don't wait on kids to be ready, because like you said, it's never going to happen. It's kind of like, hey, I'm going to wait to quit the job I'm going to wait to move and it's like, we all know this intrinsically. It is not ever a cohesive time. Kind of like we're selling our house and everyone's like, you're insane. And I'm like, this isn't a good time. I'm like, hey, when is? Like, here's my calendar. Let me pick a date.
Totally.
But I love what I would say from the big picture standpoint. Everyone really needs to look at the choice they're making. Is it for self, or is it a selfless decision? And then is it because it's a societal norm? It's because it's what they want. Because like for us, it's interesting being Christians. We get a lot of flack. Like we get a lot of people who are like, "Hey, you're horrible. Like you're going to hell. Like God hates you." You're like, "Hey, cool. Have fun with that." Like you and your one Bible verse. You go enjoy that trip. But I think even from your holistic standpoint, I'm super on board if it's like, hey, commitment, right? Like just
Yeah.
be okay with it. It's not the end of the world, and be okay with giving up yourself to others. It's okay.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
it
yeah,
hurts a little bit, but it's really joyful in the end.
Yeah, yeah, totally. Yeah, exactly. And like, and ultimately, like, you've got to acknowledge, like, in evaluating things, like, these are like, you're speaking, I was speaking in broad strokes earlier and stuff, and people have to like think about, their own situation and
for sure.
everything and everything. And so like, but yeah, I mean, I think just, broadly, it's like, yeah, I mean, just like, what the most important things in life rarely, come where everything is, perfectly, perfect and perfectly set up for it. And so you just gotta, go for it and so forth. And so, yeah, it sounds like we're in agreement there, but yeah, just broadly, we started the conversation with this, like being willing to, put yourself out there and take some chances in life. But
no, I like it. I get tired of the phrase that people tell kids today. They're like, "Don't you want to try on the pair of shoes before you buy them?" I'm like, "Come on,
Yeah.
do we compare marriage to that?"
I know,
like,
that's true.
Holy cow! You're like,
Yeah.
whoa.
And that's a fundamental point, right? I mean, treating marriage like it is a pair of shoes,
Yeah,
like
right?
treating the other person as though they're a commodity, treating,
Right.
like, and it's. I just think that's I mean, my view is that's the way to, the wrong way to think about it. It's just, because like, these, marriage isn't that,
No.
it's not, and it's not. It's not just some little contract to enter into. It's a covenant. It's and it's all this stuff. And so 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah, I always tell guys, because obviously my friend circle ever to get married.
Yeah.
And so a lot of them will come up to me and they're like, "Hey, dude, like, it's always I would say 4 to 12 weeks before the wedding date, actually, or 4 to 8." And they're like, "Hey, dude, like, this is kind of freaking me out a little bit." I'm like, "Okay." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" They're like, it's a lot to take in. This forever. Like, I'm just kind of like questioning. Not that they want to leave them, like the whole concept. I'm like, "Oh, good." And they're like, "What do you mean good?" I was like, "Well, you're actually like taking and considering the weight of what you're deciding." I said that, and it's crazy. The ones who haven't said that to me, not to throw shade, but it's like they were divorced under 3 years. Like, I've known them. It's because they were like, "Well, I can do this and we're married, and I can do this and we're divorced," right?
Yeah.
And then there's other people who took on that weight. And I've seen ones that's really been sad who took on the weight, but their partner didn't, and then they fought trying to save it, and that's just super hard to watch. You're like, you truly like this was forever.
Yep.
And I just think people need to, in all aspects of life, like take on that weight, decide, is it really worth where you want to go? Like when you were going into the race, you were considering, hey, this is gonna be a bloody battle, but I know I'm called to do this. I'm willing to take on this weight. And I am gonna sign, burn the boats, and move on, right?
Yeah. I mean, like, it's a good call. Like I mean, like, you don't want to take on grave obligations lightly, and that's true in a lot of different areas of life. And sometimes it's an easy decision because it is just like it's like it's like if you see somebody on the side of the road, who needs help and you're risking your life to do it, like you just kind of automatically do it. It's like a quick, easy decision. But sometimes sometimes it's harder to make the right decision. It takes time to reflect upon it and all that. And for most big decisions, that's what it takes, is a lot of serious thoughts, and you got to feel the weight and stuff. And, I tend to be a, kind of pretty, I'm a lawyer, a pretty thorough thinker, and I tend to think through stuff very carefully. Some people, don't need to do that to make the right decision. But you definitely, I do think, most big decisions require some time to reflect upon and so forth. And so, you got to make sure you want to appreciate, like, marriage is something that's, that is incredibly important for kids, for people broadly and everything. And so you do worry a little bit when people are taking it lightly,
right?
Or seemingly taking it lightly. So.
Yeah, I think what's interesting throughout the conversation, right, it's been, even with what the fallacy you called out, it's been around conviction, it's been around commitment, just burning the ships and going all in. It's been around, hey, even though I'm experiencing failures and struggles in something, it doesn't mean I give up on it, right?
Yeah.
So with the kind of that synopsis, as well as your overall thoughts, what challenge would you leave with people tonight? Like, hey, y'all out there sitting at home or riding in your car.
Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, I mean, I would say, like, there's the, in the Bible, there's a talk where Jesus, says to his disciples, put out into the deep, to catch a fish, to go catch, a fish, and they of course ultimately do that and catch their nets are overflowing and so forth. And like, I try to think about my life, like, am I am I putting, at any given moment, like, am I putting out into the deep? And that doesn't always mean like I'm out there doing something big or things like that. Like, am I investing enough in my daughters? Am I investing enough in my wife, Molly? Am I doing my fundamental obligations, that are sometimes uncomfortable and, challenging and things like that, or I'd rather be doing other stuff or whatever, but like, am I, doing it? So it's not necessarily, it's always some big thing, but like, I think what I would encourage people to do is just to think about, like, am I putting out into the deep in my life, and doing the things that I'm, called to do at this moment, and am I taking the risks that I'm being called to do?
I like it. Yeah, to spend the time weekly going, hey, am I being fully committed where I need to be? And if I'm not, where is that?
Yeah. I think that well said. I like
that.
Right. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on
and
being open about
absolutely.
What you would call your biggest, failure in your life. And
well, I appreciate the opportunity. It's good to, you kind of by talking through it, you reflect upon it a little bit too. And yes, good questions. So I appreciate you having me on, Devin.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Took quite a fall, didn't we, Master Bruce?
And why do we fall, Bruce? So we can learn to pick ourselves up.